Attorney's Office has agreed to talk to us a little bit this morning about your board member liability and why it is that you need to be, why you're all here. Of course, we're preaching to the choir. You guys know that everyone's on that there is some real liability for you as board members. So, Dave, when we have, go ahead and discuss, and of course, ask questions as we go.
Absolutely. I'd rather have a conversation than a lecture. And my assistant always says, you're giving more material than you can possibly get through. And I said, it's not intended to get through all the material. I didn't do a, what do you call it thing up there? PowerPoint. Because I usually end up with too many slides to get through. And I'd rather you have a material than just this. So I will say this in regard to what Johnny presented. If every county had our two purchasing Nazis who
Amen to that,
every
by the way.
purchase to the nth degree, you'd never have to worry about whether you had to bid it out or not. And if anybody repeats that, I will deny it. Whatever said. They really watch everything. In fact, I was telling my two colleagues in the county, Jan and Jen, and by the way, they have long-term expertise. They may look young, but they've been working for Weaver County a long, long time. But I was telling them, the commissioner called me last week and said, hey, purchasing is questioning a lunch I went to with two other mayors on an issue related to county business. Can they do that? Well, you pay them to do that, but just tell them to back off a little bit. But if you go to a meeting, they want you to list who was at the meeting, what you talked about, where you were at. So I just submit that. In fact, I've given them an agenda sometimes just to be a little nasty about it. What we did. Liability. Johnny will tell you if you have liability, you have some options or potential liability. You can accept that risk, you can transfer the risk, and you can insure the risk. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. The important questions, and the commissioners always ask this more than anybody, can we be sued for doing this? What's the pat answer? What's the right answer to that one? You can always be sued. Okay? And we have enough crazies out there, at least in Weaver County now, that they will sue over weird things, and if they're emotional about it enough, they will keep it going for a long time if they know how to do that. Are you likely to be sued? If you're a sheriff or county commissioner or county council, you're going to be sued. If you're a fair director or an event director, probably not, but you might be. But it always comes up when you least expect it. Jan, can I share the story about the
The Derby? Yeah.
Yes. Everybody loves demolition derbies, right? We have one every year. And we are very circumspect, and Jan's department are very good about verifying insurance prior to the event when they get that contract back. But this particular year, we had a derby, and when they went to the file to pull it, guess what we didn't have? Proof of insurance, and guess what they didn't have? Insurance. It's a long time ago. Anyhow, so make sure you have a process in place. And as to your county attorneys, we sign off on every contract that goes through. We have delegated by ordinance, as Johnny would point out, and we've got to get off purchasing and get to liability, but this is all part of it. We have delegated to the library to make certain purchases without county commission approval, and we have delegated to the fairgrounds to do routine contracts. I tell everybody, though, why not share the risk? Put them on a consent agenda so the commissioners can't say at some point, we didn't know about that, we didn't have authorized that, we didn't know about it. I call it sharing the risk, and the sheriff is a big one. He goes to some conference all the time, not the sheriff, maybe the sheriff too, and says, I have authority to sign these contracts. And I say, well, let me show you in the county or in the state code, if you sign a contract without proper authorization, you are personally liable for that contract. So if you want to be personally liable for that contract, go ahead. Why not share the risk, run it through the county commission agenda, it's not a big deal. Then you have the county attorney signing off that he's reviewed it and approved it, the department and everybody's reviewed it, the comptroller has reviewed it on our particular county or contract cover sheet, and you're covered. All right, are you likely to be sued? Probably not. What will you do when you are sued? Well, You will call Johnny Miller, right? Or Corey Sigurd, and you will say, I have a claim. And he will say you're either covered or you're not covered. Where do you go from there? If you're covered, you turn that over to them and they do the defense. How can you prevent a lawsuit? By doing what Johnny has told you you can do today. We'll get more into this. We won't go in depth on these questions. Who will defend you when you're sued? Who will pay for your defense? What if a judge or jury decides against you, and who will pay the judgment? We'll just do one lawyer joke right now. What do you do when you have a lawyer up to his neck in sand? What's the answer, everybody?
Not enough sand.
Not enough sand. Neil, you're prohibited. You can't answer these because I know you know all of that. My daughter used to come here. So, we don't have really nonprofits, so we're going to go through page 2 fairly quickly, because it looks like all counties are advisory boards. But if you do, and some of these principles still apply, a corporation can be held liable as its own entity for actions. Nobody has their own entity. Everybody's part of the county, right? We decide that here today. You're an advisory board. If you're created by the county, you're part of that advisory board. Now, we will get into how, the most important thing I think I can share with you today is emphasize that Johnny touched on, the volunteers, and how you ensure all of your people are covered when somebody gets hurt, injured in an accident, both for workers' comp or they injure somebody else. So I'm going to just say, board members should be aware of these 2 legal duties. 3 rules that govern the board of directors. We're going to skip that because that's the other ones. But the next page, and I'm going to page 4 already, is policy consideration for nonprofits. I think this still applies for you to your advisory boards. And I've been with the county about 25 years now, and the one thing I've noted about every advisory board, they forget that term advisory and they're ready to spend money. Jan and Jen, would you agree with that with your advisory boards? They want to spend money. Well, we all like to do that. Our federal government likes to spend money that they don't have, but it's our money. So, let's go down things you ought to consider as you create those boards. Conflict of interest policy for board and staff. Because of the very nature, you want people interested in the fair or interested in the type of events that you're going to host, they're going to know people that are in business that may supply goods and services, right? You've got to be careful that there's no conflict of interest as far as what they do that leads to an improper decision by you, as Johnny used in his example, your nephew that comes and provides services or whatever it was. Compensation policy for chief staff officer, we'll skip that one. Personnel policy for employees and volunteers. And by the way, if it's a volunteer, there have been a couple of lawsuits out there on sexual harassment by volunteers. So you may want to run them through your sexual harassment training to make sure that doesn't come up. And make sure they're aware of safety policies and put them through. I would recommend you put them through if you can. And I know it's cumbersome, but maybe your introductory training for new employees, even when you have volunteers who are going to be there on a regular basis. Code of conduct or code of ethics, board compensation, we'll skip that one. Travel expenditure policy for business travel by staff. These are types of policies you ought to consider. Financial management policies, including financial controls. And I would work with your county comptroller and your county money people on those type of things. Whistleblower protection policy. Sometimes volunteers are aware of things and they're scared to report. Make sure you have a reporting mechanism for wrongdoing, for embezzlement, for theft, for sexual harassment. We have a hotline in Weaver County. I think we've only had 3 calls in 15 years. They check it every day to see if there's anything. We're getting in the process of adding a whistleblower hotline to that too, so people can report that. Document destruction and retention policy. Any documents you create, if you're a board, are subject to ground law, in my opinion, for Weaver County. Now, that goes to my next statement. You heard Johnny say, trust your county attorney. I know county attorneys from the rural areas everywhere. I respect nearly every one of them. There's probably only maybe one in the state that strains my credulity at times. But they are there to protect you. And so if you get their buy-off on a contract or a policy, That's your added protection for what you need. And I would do that. If you have a question about liability, contracts, or policies, run that by your county attorney and have them initial it. And if you're asking for an opinion and you think they're giving an off-the-cuff or curbside opinion and you're concerned enough about it, and Neil isn't walking away just because I'm talking away. He's an athlete, but he's an athlete with a bad back today, so he has to get up and stretch it, I think. Have them give you a written opinion when you need it. And I know that's tough, especially if you're in a county, rural county, and you pay your attorney by the hour. There's lots of stories, and I have lots of jokes on that. We won't do those today. But if they get paid that way, sometimes your commission doesn't like you to do it. But if you have a serious issue, let's say the rodeo issue, and they don't want you to run that contract by the county attorney, I think you need to make them aware of the potential risk that can happen in some of these events, and make sure your county attorney reviews and is on board if they've approved it. I'm talking, am I making any sense? And number two, if you have questions, stop me anytime. You don't have to raise your hand or blurt out. The gift acceptance policy, that's another one. And you will have both state law and maybe county ordinance that references that. I had a county commissioner some years ago who wanted a pair of boots. We won't mention names. He wanted a pair of boots from a vendor that was supplying things to the county. So I finally found something in the code that allowed the county commissioner to accept a gift given in honor in an open commission meeting. And he got those boots. Didn't he, Jan?
Yep.
He did. Okay. Nice boots. He really wanted. Fundraising policy. You ought to look at that. They include a corporate sponsorship policy, because when they want to sponsor something, they want to buy it forever. Okay? And that's okay if they're paying you enough to put their name on a sign or do some other things. That's a policy decision for you guys. The lawyers aren't really involved in that so much as you and your commissioners or councils. Review of contracts with independent paid fundraisers. If you have that, make sure those contracts go through people too. Now, page 5, we're going to spend more time on. This is to get into the meat of stuff right now. How many of you use volunteers for your elections? Everybody does, right? There is a federal Volunteer Protection Act, provides shielding for individuals acting on behalf of an organization within the scope of their position, as long as the actions are not criminal, negligent, or reckless. That translates into state, and that's something I'm not going to say any more about the feds, but we have a state Volunteer Protection Act. And the next few pages we're going to get into both of those, because I think that may be one of the most important things we consider today. When I say nonprofits, this applies to all of your boards. And here's what you want to know that you have when you talk to Johnny. Commercial general liability insurance protects volunteers and employees from bodily injury and personal injury claims. Any objection to that one, Johnny?
Gotta have that.
If they're approved volunteers, right? Okay, personal liability, workers' compensation. Auto liability, if they're working for the organization, is how the state does it. But if they're just on their own time, I think our state law puts their policy in first place, which is what most people do. We have county employees who want to use their own vehicle. We have them sign a statement that their insurance will apply first, even if they're on county business at that time, and they're paid a mileage factor, okay? So some of them want to tender that defense to the county. Well, it may be joint. Okay. Here's the first little aside. I don't complete sentences at times, and I take little asides from time to time. For your own personal protection, this is personal legal advice. Go look at your auto policy and see if you have $250,000 underinsured and uninsured coverage. Can I do this here, Johnny? I don't have any friends or relatives really that are in